Welcome to the Changeroom podcast, a whiff of wellbeing with Minnie and Matt.
Today on the Changeroom podcast, we have an international guest, Diana Rodgers. I'm really excited about this one. Diana is a registered dietitian with a clinical practice helping people recover through real food, which I love. Her blog and podcast, Sustainable Dish, started as a healthy and locally sourced recipe site, but has grown into a much deeper dive into the food systems, which is fantastic to dive into. She spent the last 18 years working on an organic farm which grows vegetables and raises pasture-based meat. Fantastic. And her new book with Wolfe, which I've been following Rob for a long time as well, is called The Sacred Cow, and the Sacred Cow movie coming out later this year, which I'm excited about. Diana, welcome to the Changeroom podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Let's jump into our first question, which we always ask our guests. What is the one thing that you have done today to boost your health and personal state?
Today, well, I've done two. Can I say two things?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Say as many as you like.
I went for a big walk, even though it was rainy and it was beautiful. And it just really, I walk every single day. I think, just connecting with nature and just being outside in the light every single morning is just so important for me. And then I drank a big pot of heavily salted chicken broth.
Beautiful.
All morning. So two things. Yes.
Yum. Yeah, love that. So you live just outside of Boston. Tell us about your organic farm. Sounds amazing.
It's an organic vegetable farm. We run a CSA program, which is community supported agriculture. So I don't know if they probably have something similar to that in Australia, but it's where we have members of the farm. So people commit to buying whatever their share is for the whole rest of the summer. So they pay up front. And we have members that do that. We have members that commit to eggs. We have members that commit to a certain, a quarter of a sheep, things like that. And then, there's lamb, pigs, chickens for eggs, a few goats, but people around here don't eat goat meat very much, although it tastes a lot like lamb.
I actually love it, slow cooking it, yeah.
Yeah, people should eat more of it, but it's just not as popular. Even lamb is not very popular in the U.S. at all.
Right, wow.
But I think it's the best tasting of the red meats personally, and so the goats are hysterical. They have a lot of personality. They escape a lot. And it's just a really great way to raise children.
Yeah, awesome. I grew up on a farm myself, so we had our own cows and chickens and eggs and all that. So it's a great way to sort of grow up and have a really strong foundation from the beginning, which is great, isn't it?
I thought they called you the goat because you were the greatest
of
all time, but I think Diana's description is far more accurate.
It is, yeah. Well, my heritage is Italian, so slow cooking goat is certainly in our culture. So I've had that many a times, which I love.
Diana, one of you've got three real key areas that you focus on is ethical farming and sustainable farming that had the impacts on the environment and also the dietary side of things. And we could certainly go down those three paths, but we'd probably be here for the next 24 hours. So what I thought I might do is get you to lean back on, I guess, your academic background and where this all started for you is in the nutritional side of things. And it's such a confusing topic. And we've got people tuning in now looking at this who want to elevate their health and the way that they live their life. But it's so confusing. Should they be a vegan? Should they be a vegetarian? Should they do the carnivore diet? Should they do paleo? And you just start scratching your head. So what are your key foundations in your approach to diet?
So we do in the back of the book lay out what an ideal, most nutrient dense diet is. And so when you remove emotion from the equation and just look at the data and look at which foods are most bioavailable on top of which foods list, for example, sweet potatoes say they have vitamin A, when you look on the database, but it's really beta carotene, which is the precursor to vitamin A. And almost half of adults can't make that conversion very easily from beta carotene to active vitamin A. And so all those things need to be taken into consideration. And so when you're looking at what is the optimal diet for humans, it is very clear that it contains a large amount of animal sourced foods, protein and fat. In addition, I think there's lots of items from the plant kingdom that are also really healthy to eat, berries, and just when looking at straight nutrient density, asparagus, spinach, broccoli, and just brightly colored, mostly leafy things. And I think everyone has a different ratio of what's ideal for them. Yeah. So some people might not be able to digest plants as easily as other people for a variety of reasons. Certain people might need a little more protein than others, and certainly different stages of your life, you have higher protein requirements. But I'm a huge protein advocate, and I think people in general don't eat enough protein. And so when you pull in animal source protein, the great thing is it's the most bioavailable protein you can be eating. So we absorb the most nutrients, we pull the most protein from animal source protein. But it's also highly satiating. So you're going to be less hungry later. It's very low in calories compared to plant sourced proteins. And it's the highest nutrient value. So you've got much more nutrients per calorie in animal source foods than in plant source foods.
I would ask the question I love the way that you said that there's a balance between each, and it seems to vary from person to person. That would be what I took from what you said there as well. How do we find that balance ourselves? What's the way to work out whether I should take some more protein or increase my fat intake, or how do I work that out?
That can be a little bit hard, especially when you're talking about fat, because the genetics play a huge role in how sensitive your body is to fat and saturated fat, right? If you have certain genes, fat can be deadly, right? And so genetics play a role. I think your microbiome health plays a role in all of this, your age, your general health status, how much stress do you have going on in your life? There's so many things that contribute to that. But generally what I like to see is, about 20-25% of calories from animal source meat, protein. And so that ends up looking about twice what the US RDA is for protein. So I usually start women at about 100 grams of protein per day in my practice, which is not 100 grams of weight. Like your listeners might be thinking that's, to weigh 100 grams, that's 100 grams of protein. And so we use ounces here, but so I don't know how to translate that, but
you have an equation in your book about, I think, 100 grams of protein, 100 grams of meat equals only 27 grams of protein, or something in the book that
sounds about right, actually. 100 grams, because 100 grams would be about 5 ounces. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is that
Yep.
So anyway, it's a lot more meat than what people are used to eating. A lot of people don't even have any protein with breakfast. If they're eating just, cereal or a little granola or a bar or something, or a lot of people will have a smoothie, but they don't really add much in the way of protein powder to that. And and eggs actually are surprisingly low in protein. There's only 6 grams of protein per egg. And so that's a shocker to a lot of people. So when I advise, try to get maybe 30 grams of protein with your breakfast, that's a lot of eggs. That's 5 eggs. Yeah. But then if you're also trying to keep your calories within check, it can be difficult to do that, especially if you're avoiding animal sourced food. So you can get 30 grams of protein from a small piece of fish or beef or chicken, but you would need cups and cups of beans and rice or, something like that from a plant to get that same protein, and it would end up being a lot more calories.
You said that you started your day with some chicken broth. What's my protein and caloric intake from a good, a nice bit of chicken broth or bone broth?
Not much. I sip on it throughout the day, but my actual breakfast was eggs and ham, actually.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of sip on chicken broth like it's coffee or tea just throughout the day. I just kind of drink it. And then my lunch today was a can of tuna with a little bit of just a little salad with it, like some parsley and some vegetables.
Beautiful. So. Well, what about some of the studies that say that red meat pushes up IGF-1, and obviously we need IGF-1 as kids, and we're growing, building healthy brains and bodies. But as we're older, some people say that we don't need as much as IGF-1. What happens when we eat red meat? It raises it, it ages us. What's
and mTOR, oh my gosh, and all these things, right? So the problem with looking at individual reductionist, individual compounds, you're not looking at the whole picture. And so the biggest concern I have with people who are getting older is lack of muscle tone. And your protein requirements actually go up starting at about 40 because you're just starting to lose muscle. You're like, I'm on the downhill already of that equation. And so the most important thing, I'm concerned about longevity, but I'm also concerned about quality of life.
Yep.
And I think that having strength is incredibly important if you want to live a healthy, long life. And so we need people to be eating protein. And yes, like fasting occasionally seems to have some health benefits. Most cultures and religions have that built in, and there's probably good reason for that. But we've seen throughout history that, hunter-gatherers, the ones who did make it past, childhood, infant mortality, actually lived quite long lives, very healthy lives. And, there was a wide range of macronutrients, but their protein intake was relatively high.
And obviously, movies recently come out and, vilifying meat and, plant-based diet. And I have a mix of both, and I certainly didn't like the way they started vilifying red meat. What was your take on that when that all that come out? Now all the plant-based production and so forth.
Well, actually, I made the film halfway through writing the book because I was writing the book and yet another vegan film had come out of attacking health. I don't even love saying the name, right? Because then people are going to go out and watch it.
That's right. Yeah.
So I don't say the name. But I realized just how effective they are at swaying people. They're so convincing. And even before I learned much about nutrition, I actually went back for my graduate degree after I had kids. So like later in my life. But before that, I would be very confused too. I would read a book on juice fasting or juicing, and I'd be like, oh, that sounds so perfect. And then I'd read a book on raw veganism, and that sounds good too. And it's, people are very convincing. And if you don't have a really firm education in, especially looking at evolutionary biology and like anthropology and, questioning things and knowing how to decode scientific papers. If you don't have all that, then there's lots of things that can sound convincing, and those films are really, really powerful. And so that's why I decided to make the film version of the book, because I knew that the book would only reach the true believers that really want this information. But there needed to be a film to be shown in schools when they're showing. At my son's high school, they show these films in science class.
Cool.
And the science teacher is telling the kids to eat these fake burger products because it's the right thing to do for the environment. And actually my son has an Apple Watch, and the day the teacher did that, he hit record and stood up and basically just gave her a whole dissertation of my work. And awesome. I was so proud of him.
Good.
I didn't know that he actually really believed it and was listening all these times.
Yeah, that's it.
And so I feel like the film will reach a lot more young people. The narrator of the film is a guy, Nick Offerman, who's kind of a famous celebrity here in the US with younger people. He's on a show called Parks and Rec. Yeah. And his character is somebody who loves meat too. But personally, he's a huge believer in the type of agriculture that I endorse in the film. And so the film is very different from the book, where the book is very scientific and logic and well-cited. And although we tried to break it up and make it a little, funny or goofy, and there's some, nice visuals in there to help people understand things a little bit better. There's some nice charts. Yep. The film actually is more stories of producers. And so I'm taking people to farms to see the changes that have been made. And it's really, really powerful when you see, especially my favorite shoot was in Mexico. We went to northern Mexico in the Chihuahuan Desert, where we're driving for 3 hours to get to this ranch we filmed at. It's just barren, just sand and like some scrubby little bushes and sand, but it used to be a massive grassland. With bison and all kinds of ruminant animals everywhere, and grass taller than a human. And just over the years, it turned into this degraded landscape. And this one rancher he's working with a collective of ranchers that are restoring over 1 million acres of desert back into these grasslands just with cattle. And so when they're managed well and moved around a lot, and we kind of talk about that practice a little bit in the film, you can see the magic that happens and the transformation that can happen to the landscapes when you have properly managed grazing animals on it. And Australia is just the perfect landscape for so much of that good grazing to happen.
Yeah, but I just like over there, we are turning soil into dirt, and there's some process. And I'd like you to elaborate a little bit more on that, because we are talking about, the benefits of meat. But I guess what we've also got to add into that, and this is what I love about your approach, is, the source of that meat and where it comes from, because there are some meats, the same beast, but one meat is not good for you because of the way it's raised and the source of it, and the other one is. And I know that's what I love about your approach. It merges these three things: that sustainable farming, along with the ethical side of things, along with the nutritional benefit. Yeah. So I'd love you to articulate that for us.
Yes. And a lot of people that are opposed to meat love to start with the ethics, right? It's wrong. It's bad. Meat is murder. But I don't feel like we can have a very intelligent, ethical debate about meat without understanding the contribution that grazing animals can have to landscapes and what happens when you pull them off, when you have no animals in a food system. But then also nutritionally, the contribution that animal source foods make to our food system. Because if we, didn't have animal source foods, there's a lot of people that don't have the privilege to, go to a CVS or a pharmacy or, any kind of pharmacy to get their B12 supplements and their iron supplements, right? There's many places in the world where that's just not an option for these people. And grazing animals are the only thing that might thrive in that area. There's also a lot of places where women can't own land, but they can own livestock. And it's a very important commodity for them. It's, they might trade a goat if somebody's sick in order to get the money to pay the medical bills or something like that. And so to demand that the world eat less meat, I think from an ethical point of view is actually quite dangerous when we're looking at malnutrition and even the livelihood of small scale farmers and, all these people that are living in poverty that depend on livestock. And so as far as the nutrition goes, meat, period, is a nutrient dense food. It's what we're eating it with that's the bigger concern for me. So it's not the burger so much as like the bun, the sauce, the fries, the soda, all of those things that come along with it. And then when we look at better meat raised in a more environmental way, there are small health benefits, but they're not dramatic when we're talking about grass-fed beef versus beef that is finished on a feedlot. Honestly, it's just not a massive health difference as far as human health goes. There are massive environmental differences and big ethical differences in that. But I just caution, like a doctor would never say only eat organic vegetables or don't eat vegetables. Right. And so the same thing as a clinician, I'm careful to, like if there's a mom working 2 or 3 jobs and she's got little kids, please go to the store and buy the best meat you can afford, but buy meat. Don't buy, it's not going to be better for your children to avoid meat just because you can't get grass-fed meat. So I just try to have a little nuance with that too.
I love that point.
Good tip. Yeah, good tip. Let's go into the environmental side for a little bit. I've got a mate here who's really conscious about his health, and he's stopped eating meat a bit last year. And I asked him the question why, and he goes, "I know that red meat has nutritional benefits, but I'm doing it because of carbon emissions." And I was like, "You haven't looked at the bigger picture. If you look at, let's look at transport industry, big monocrops, all that type of stuff creates more carbon in the air." Tell us about the life cycle and the ecosystem of a regenerative farm, how it can sequester carbon out of the air. Can you just break that down for us?
Well, folks, this is video, right? Folks can watch this.
Yep.
Because I actually have a poster right behind me I can grab that actually explains it. It's going to be backwards, though, I think. Awesome. But this is available on my website, and I often have this behind me. I don't know. Maybe you can't see it very well. Yeah. Can you see it?
A little bit lower.
Just a touch lower.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, folks can go to sacredcow.info or to my Instagram, and it's called the cattle carbon cycling versus fossil fuels. So I'll just explain it, but basically it's a lot easier to see it.
Yeah.
I'm just a very visual person. And so when we're looking at cow farts, it's actually not farts. It's the belching from cattle. It's their burps that actually are emit methane. But that's actually part of a cycle. It's not adding new methane to the atmosphere. We don't have more grazing animals than we did before in North America before we got rid of all the bison and the deer and everything. It's the same amount. So it's the same amount of circulating methane. It's just coming from cattle now. And when they belch out the methane, it actually is in the atmosphere for about 10 years. But then after 10 years, it breaks down into hydrogen and water, H2O, which is part of the water cycle, like rain. And then CO2, carbon dioxide, which plants take up in photosynthesis, and they release the oxygen that we breathe in. And then some of that carbon turns into grass. Some of that carbon also then gets leaked down through the roots and feeds the microbes in the soil, which then give the plant what it needs. So there's bacteria, and then there's fungal networks in the soil that are exchanging nutrients to the plant in exchange for the sugars, the carbon that the plant is dripping to it. So it's a symbiotic relationship. It's really, really cool. And up to about 40% of that carbon can actually be locked into the soil, turns into soil and stays there, and isn't released until something like tilling happens and we're plowing. When you plow land, you're actually releasing tons and tons of carbon. So ironically, it's the plant-based protein supplements that have really, really high emissions that we want that carbon locked in the soil, not to be exposed through plowing. And so anyway, that's a complete life cycle of that greenhouse gas compared to fossil fuels, which are a one-way road because they are taking carbon that's stored deep in the Earth's core and methane and pumping it up and exposing it to the atmosphere, bringing in new greenhouse gases. And when you look at the contribution that cattle make, even not taking into account the cycle of it, right? Just the overall contribution, it's about 5%. All livestock is about 5% emissions globally, compared to the just transportation industry is 14%.
Correct. Yeah, that's what I don't understand when we do rotational grazing, and you just talked about the carbon offset. Why isn't government putting policies in to actually say this is the way farming has to be? I don't know. In Australia, we only have 12% of our farms are grass-fed, grass-finished beef.
That's a lot, actually, compared to the US.
America, which is only like 1 or 2%, I think.
Yeah, it's so small here.
But
we actually get a lot of grass-fed beef from Australia, though.
Yeah,
here.
But even that is small as well, really.
Right, right.
Why isn't government stepping in, knowing all this knowledge and saying this is the way we should be farming to regenerate our soil?
Yeah, I mean, in the US, we actually have this one program that pays farmers to not utilize their land, not graze it. It's called the CRP program. And so I went through the math and looked at, what if we converted that to grazing? What if we turned, the cattle out on harvested cornfields and allowed them to eat, just the crop residue that's in the fields? It's a great thing that cattle and sheep and goats can do that pigs and chickens really can't do that because they're monogastric. So they're competing directly with us for food, where cattle can actually eat a lot of things that we can't eat and upcycle it into protein, which is really special about ruminants, and why even in typical agriculture, I think cattle are a better choice than chicken or pigs. But then if we did regenerative type grazing, where we're intensively grazing them, but then moving them off and giving the land a rest, and moving them the way that herding animals naturally move in nature, the productivity of the land actually goes way up too. So you're able to stock more cattle on that same piece of land, because you're improving the quality of the pasture so much more by managing it better. So we have the land in the US to be grass finishing beef. So it's really an awareness problem, I think. There's a lot of interest. There's a lot of money to be made in plant-based proteins. Everyone's getting into it. I mean, Bill and Melinda Gates are getting into it and funding research that makes it look like vegetarian diets are healthier. There was just a study that came out of India that the Gates Foundation funded, trying to make it look like vegetarian pregnant women are actually healthier than the ones that ate meat, but that's not true.
That's what people don't understand with certain studies, that who's behind it, who's funding it. Is it epidemiology? Are they taking just questionnaires, or is it meta-analyses? All that type of stuff that people don't understand about studies, which is important when you dive into this.
Yeah. So I'm actually, in addition to just releasing the film and, getting it out there to the public and trying to get it into schools, so at least there's a counter talking point to the vegan films. I'm actually working on what you can call an impact campaign. So it's basically a campaign that allows me to then go after politicians, try to get the film in front of them. So it's sort of like an additional piece of activism that I'm raising money to extend the message of the film and try to impact policymakers. So awesome. Our vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party here, Kamala Harris, is talking about, ending animal agriculture or something. And, I'd love to just have 10 minutes with her,
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing is I want to get to more universities. I mean, there's just a big need for people to think differently about agriculture and know that this isn't some fantasy, that this is something that really works. And there's growing body of science behind it, proving that when managed well, cattle can sequester carbon and improve entire ecosystem function.
I just want to ask one more quick one before you jump in, Maddie. I think Chris Kresser was saying if we continue farming this way in America, there's only like 60 years left of farming because of the soil is not getting regenerated. Is that correct?
That's a good question. So I had been saying that quote too, and it comes from an article that was published in, I believe, The Atlantic, where somebody overheard a woman from the FAO at a conference say that, but she had no like data to back. It was just like an off comment that she made. So, so I actually, I contacted the FAO, and they were like, this isn't the official position of the United Nations. But regardless of what the actual number is, it's not a sustainable system. And so whether it's 60 years or 65 or 20 or 100, it's still not something that's going to be around for very much longer. It totally depletes the soil the way we're farming now. And we have to have a regenerative system. So it's the only system that's going to bring us forward. And so it's just a matter of, do we choose it now, or do we get to a point where it chooses us, right?
Yeah.
You stole my question.
Oh, sorry.
I guess just to take us off in a different direction, I had a look at a little bit of your bio, Diana, and you had a Crohn's disease, I think that's right?
Celiac,
sorry. So that's an autoimmune disease. And Anthony's got a pretty amazing story about how he rehydrated his discs through diet. And in 2011, I met Anthony, and I had an autoimmune disease, a type of rheumatitis. And he introduced me to the Weston A. Price way of diet. And that's something I used to have. It's not something I have anymore. And we run the program, and Anthony, a lot of what Anthony delivers, we've seen type 2 diabetes reversed, and we have all these amazing stories, literally thousands of them. It's pretty astonishing. I'd like, from a dietitian side of things, though, to explain to me what is going on in my body just because of the way I eat and what I've changed. I know that you're going to talk about the gut, but what's going on in my body to allow that healing?
That's a good question. And I think some of it we don't know the answers to, but some of it we do know a little bit. And it's very unfortunate that there aren't many other dietitians that you would get to talk about this, because this isn't something that is taught in American and certainly not Australian dietetics programs, because of the bias that's going on in those programs. And the bias towards plant-based diets, honestly, in those programs. So, we don't know what triggers, for example, celiac disease to turn on. So I have the gene that makes me susceptible to it. My kids do too. But it got turned on in me, and it could be, some people think it's glyphosate exposure that, the wheat that we have here in America is just so heavily dosed in glyphosate that that it just sort of triggers, it makes that epigenetic flip from off to on in celiac. And a lot of people think that celiac is like the gateway autoimmune disease that then leads to all other autoimmune diseases, MS and everything else. And that gluten, the protein in wheat, is one of the main drivers behind a lot of autoimmune diseases. So that's one thought. Other viruses can sometimes flip it on too. I've heard that MS, there's theories, or even I know adult onset type 1 diabetes is sometimes they think that it's a virus that makes that turn on. But what I've seen a lot in my practice is when we pull people off industrial food and get them eating real food, pulling out a lot of the grains, and just focusing on a diet that is less inflammatory and more, nutrient dense, the body can stop attacking itself and just start healing again. So, some people can tolerate a little bit of gluten. Other people, it's completely no gluten, no dairy. For some people that are carnivore, it's completely no plants at all. And I think that that should be considered as a therapeutic tool as well. I don't recommend it as like a cool way to lose weight or, for a healthy person just to just for fun. But I have seen some amazing case studies of people who are extremely sick completely reverse their health conditions by pulling out all plants altogether. So I think there's just different extremes of everything, and where, celiac is pretty extreme. I have a very limited amount of food that I can eat. Some people you see in the grocery store who are still thin, who can eat seemingly whatever they want, they just kind of like won the genetic lottery. They're a little bit more than me, but I feel so grateful, when I talk to people who maybe have type 2 diabetes or an autoimmune disease, and I'm talking to them the first time about what they need to pull out of their diet in order to, recover their health, especially type 2 diabetes, because it's so easy to reverse, type 2 diabetes, right? But it's driven by basically an allergy to sugar, right? I mean, that's kind of what it is. And that's what I try to explain to them, is that this is not a bad thing. It's actually a gift that you're learning how to save yourself. Yeah. That, so instead of feeling sorry for yourself that you can't eat the pizza, feel grateful that you found out that you can't eat pizza, and that's going to save you, right? So just kind of flipping it on its head a little bit and looking at it in a different way, I think would be helpful for some people.
Analogy to sugar. I absolutely love that. Yeah, that's great. I guess the other thing I'd like you to dive into is, because so often when we talk about diet, people are concerned about the visual side of it, right? Weight. Yeah. I guess the other thing that I'd like to get your opinion on is the impact on our, cognitive ability and our behavior. I know that there's been research done, like in correctional facilities in the US, about, having different types of diets and seeing different outcomes in the amount of violence that's experienced. I'd love to get your insights into that.
Well, one study that I like to cite a lot in the book is actually out of Kenya with school children who were food insecure. And it was the only RCT I know of that looked at meat in children versus less meat. Like what happens when kids who are food insecure actually get a little bit more meat. And because I get really nervous when I hear parents saying that they're going to feed their kids a vegan diet. I think, whatever with an adult, but when we're talking about kids, I get, as a mom and a dietitian, I get very, very nervous about that. And so, again, the only study that we know of, it gave one group an extra meat supplement, basically, and that group performed better cognitively, behaviorally, and physically. Compared to the dairy group and the group that was just overfed calories. And there's a lot of programs out there that are just trying to get milk out, like they think that, just adding a little milk to a vegetarian school lunch for poor kids is like the way to go. And unfortunately, dairy can actually inhibit iron absorption. And so that's really dangerous, because we know that stunting is a really huge problem in a lot of the developing countries. And when kids get more meat, they do better in school, they have better behavior, and it's better for their GDP to just, make sure that these kids are actually well nourished as they're growing up. And so, policies that are worldwide saying everyone needs to eat less meat, and, I think it's unethical.
Yeah. Well, and what about, say, conventional dietitians or nutritionists, and their learnings is sometimes the complete opposite to, their standard food pyramid? Because when I was a professional athlete playing a contact sport, and we had a conventional nutritionist back in our day, and they said to me, for my genetic makeup, you're blessed. You can eat whatever you want. You can hydrate on orange juice or lemonade if you wanted. So when a young 20-year-old hears that, that's what I was doing. I was eating whatever I wanted, hydrating on whatever, alcohol. It was just, it all went down.
Hydrating on alcohol.
6 years after, it all come crashing down for 4 years. But, the conventional model is almost the complete opposite.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. It's interesting how a lot of people don't know this, but dietetics, the profession, bloomed out of the Seventh-day Adventist church. So the first dietitian was a Seventh-day Adventist, which is a They believe that eating meat is sinful and gives you lust, and so it's the only way to control that is to remove meat and alcohol and spicy things from the diet and make it a bland plant-based diet. And their philosophy is still present in a lot of the ways we're looking at things even today. So there was a position paper by the Academy of Nutrition in America on vegetarian and vegan diets, and every single author on that position paper was either a vegetarian or a religious vegetarian. And that needs to be disclosed. We need to be pulling bias out of these things and really look at the science and the evidence. And so there's nutrition science, as you mentioned earlier, is not really very good. It's really hard to look at an overall diet of someone, and actually it's impossible to look at an overall diet of someone and pinpoint one specific food to say that caused the cancer. So when we're looking at these big studies, actually there was a really big one that came out of Australia that was a big, I think it was a meta-analysis of a whole bunch of studies that looked at vegetarian versus omnivore diets. And when they adjusted for all the confounding factors, so for lifestyle, smoking, exercise, all these things, they found absolutely no difference in longevity at all, no benefit to reducing meat consumption or eliminating meat.
And have you found now, like, the learnings or the teachings in university is changing to
no,
it's still
absolutely not. I found that some of them are actually. I went and I interviewed with Walter Willett at Harvard, and so he is like Mr. USDA dietary guidelines. He's the author of the Eat Lancet paper, and I actually have him in my film saying, farmers have known for thousands of years that if you want to fatten up an animal, you put them in a confined space where they can't move around and you feed them lots of grains. And humans are like that too. I can't believe he said that, but he did say that. And I have him in the film saying that.
Oh, no way. That's great.
He doesn't know. He signed a release and everything. He doesn't even know he's in the film.
Yeah, right.
But when I was at Harvard, and I was sort of like snooping around in the halls at Harvard School of Public Health, at where his office is, I did see some papers on keto, but it was plant-based keto. Right. So meat's still bad, but maybe keto's good, but it has to be plant-based keto. Yeah. Right. So I guess maybe keto is something that is, some people are starting to look at. Sarah Hallberg is a doctor here in the US that did do a paper on reversing type 2 diabetes with a ketogenic diet. Yep. And had a lot of success in her clinic, and I've been to her clinic. I've interviewed patients of hers. But as far as the meat goes, meat, so the fear of fat is really dissipating, I think, in nutrition circles. But meat is worse in our minds than fat ever could be, because not only is meat gonna kill you, but it's also killing beautiful animals and destroying the planet at the same time, right? It's this perfect trifecta of evil. And so you have to be able to not only address nutrition, but also environment and ethics if you want to have a well-rounded argument against somebody who's pushing for a lower meat diet. And nobody is thinking in all of these camps. Everyone's so siloed, right? So you have the environmentalists. Even here in the US, people that supported my film, there's a lot of people here that will support cattle for grazing, but still we need to all be eating less meat, of course. And then you have a lot of nutrition experts that are only concerned about nutrition and whatever with the environment, right? And so it can be hard to bring all these camps together.
What about the big monocrops? The big monocrops that are killing insects and rodents and much far greater animals than just a normal regenerative beef farm as well, which people don't even think about.
Yes. And so when you look at a regenerative farm that's actually increasing life, right? It's bringing more soil health, which increases biodiversity underground and above ground. It can provide habitat for birds and all kinds of critters. You know, when you look at a system like that and consider that one cow, steer, can provide almost 500 pounds of meat. I don't know what that is in kilograms.
That's almost half.
Okay. And compare that to the number of lives that are destroyed in a typical industrial plant-based system where you're destroying an entire ecosystem just to make way for the field that you need, right? So you're either, you have to like till up a prairie or a grassland or a forest. You have to cut down a forest, right? So anything that was naturally living there now has to die or displace, move somewhere else, right? And crowd out in their new home, the other people, the other animals. But then you're tilling, so you're releasing tons of carbon and killing more stuff, squashing little bunnies and mice and everything. And then all the chemicals that you need, the pesticides, insecticides, getting into waterways, killing the fish, killing the birds that need to eat the insects, killing the bears that need to eat the fish. I mean, creating massive dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico and everywhere else. Those are the two options. And I think that the life of one cow that can feed a family for a year is certainly, out of a regenerative ag system, a much better way to go than the industrial plant-based system.
Yeah.
So Diana, can I ask a massive favor?
Yes.
I need you to, because the cynic in me is just going, feed me. So are we talking about like big ag and their connection to making short-term, well, let's just call it money, straight away out of soy, grain, and then the herbicides and pesticides and the association between those two industries? Are they just screening people out to the awareness that we need to adopt in this type of?
Oh yeah, I mean, regenerative agriculture is not good for the fossil fuel industry. The eating less meat distracts us from the real problems, which is ultra processed food and fossil fuels and consumerism and materialism and all the evils of the world, right? So it's so much easier to pin it on a cow. And so, I have a whole chapter actually in the book called Meat as Scapegoat. And we actually almost named the book Scapegoat. But that's what cattle have become. Like, it's so much easier to pick one villain than that's just easier for the human brain to do that rather than to really look at entire systems and understand that we have massively screwed up. And it's going to be incredibly complicated to fix it. And so, why not just eat less meat? I mean, that's a perfect campaign.
Yeah. I think even in government, like the health sector and agriculture sector, they're all completely separate. They should be very well connected to create a good ecosystem, like you were saying. It's even in Australia, it's the same, which is worrying for the future. You know what I mean?
We need to do
something. I mean, it makes so much sense to me, and I feel very like I'm the only one, and I've got this little tiny microphone that's like muted, right? And I just want to be screaming all of this all the time, and everybody is just floating down this river of eat less meat, and I'm the only one that's like trying to like stop, please think about this differently. So I'm hoping that the film makes some level of impact at the policy level to try to encourage farmers and consumers and governments to increase support for regenerative agriculture.
And what we're going to have listening here, Diana, is consumers. And a lot of us, I guess, are city dwellers. Well, Anthony's a city dweller. I'm a fringe city dweller. And it'd be nice to be able to, be on a property like yourself and take up ethical farming. But what can we do as consumers to support this approach? Because because I can't make a farm. If you saw me try to do a farm, you'd just go, Matt, just go inside.
It's really funny because in the book, we actually have a big list of what you can do. And there's lots of things. And actually, even we listed things to just be a more sustainable human in general, with better contributors to society. And this was written pre-COVID. But now, I even sent a list to Rob, my co-author, saying like, look what we wrote. Like after, all the lockdowns happened, which are still happening here in the US, it still makes a lot of sense, like all the things that we wrote. So we included things like, don't be unhealthy. Take care of your body so you're not a burden on the healthcare system. Make sure you have some savings so that and don't just spend all your money. Like we wrote about that in a book about cows, right? Because we're trying to
hear that. Pay attention to Diana. Sorry, I digress.
But then on the farming side and the purchasing side, right, definitely try to, buy the best meat you can afford directly from a farmer if you can, because avoiding the middlemen and buying directly from the farmer actually makes more money land in the farmer's pocket, which is more jobs for rural communities. In America, we have lost our rural communities because of industrial farming. So in towns, you drive around and all the small towns are all boarded up because everyone's just buying everything from these big box stores and not local small businesses and farms anymore. And it's now every town looks exactly the same. There's the same, big stores, controlling everything, Amazon controlling everything, all the purchasing. And so I'm a huge believer in just supporting the little guy and more regional food systems. I think we have to scale this in order to make as big an impact as we can. And so, there's a lot of purists out there that get frustrated with me when I work with industry, like larger companies that are trying to make even a small shift for a large company is going to be a big deal. Like if we can get McDonald's to have a small percentage of their burgers grass-fed, that's going to be a massive, massive win for everybody. And it doesn't have to be, only bicycle to your local small farmer and, 100% regenerative only. Like we can all do a little bit better. I think, guys who are strong can go volunteer on farms and dig post holes, and there's an actual farmer's carry, instead of, I used to go to CrossFit and do these farmer carries, where you're like walking around with kettlebells, but that's a legit actual chore on a real farm, right? And so we've hosted CrossFit, workouts at the farm and, love volunteers on the farm that are fit guys. Or if you're really good at computers, make a website for your farmer, like offer to help in any way you can because they need it. They're not always the best marketers of their own products. So I try to help with that, with some of the infographics that I have. So I think there's a way that all of us can do better supporting local farmers.
That's some great initiatives there.
So, if we merge the COVID or the pandemic conversation in, obviously eating this way also impacts your immune system positively.
Right, exactly. And I can tell you my nutrition practice is so busy now because everyone has gained weight with constant access to their refrigerator and boredom and making bad choices because, when people are scared, they eat a lot of comfort food. And so we've just seen this, people are home baking all the time. It's like the worst thing you could be doing is, if I want a treat, I'm not going to bake 12 of them and have them sitting in front of me for 3 days, right? I'll just go out and get a little bit of ice cream and be done with it, right? If you are metabolically more healthy, you're much less likely to have a severe reaction from coronavirus. We've seen that. And actually it's even affected agriculture, like I know in Europe, France was calling on the unemployed, like software workers to go work in the fields because they were having problems with labor. You know, they couldn't get the labor to harvest the asparagus. The asparagus was, growing out of control. So I think if someone doesn't have a job right now, a lot of people are in the US the labor force is pretty bad here. But farms, the vegetables are still growing and the animals still need to be fed. And if you're somebody who can work on a farm, go volunteer on a farm for a while and get out of your house and stop baking cookies.
Get outdoors. That's it.
It's the same here, Diana, because a lot of the workforce that we have on farms are normally backpackers that come from overseas. And obviously there's no backpackers here at the moment because there's no one from overseas. So there's a lot of work opportunities in the country areas, harvesting and picking fruit and veggies.
So tell us about the movie. When is it coming out? And what was it like, writing a book with Rob Wolfe and doing the movie with him?
What was it like to write a book with Rob Wolfe? Annoying. And he will admit that too. So this is nothing I wouldn't say directly to Rob. He's one of my best friends. It's fine.
Yeah, he's awesome.
So the film, so the book I co-wrote with him, but the film, he's the executive producer, which means he was not involved in a day-to-day, but he's more helping me with the fundraising because it's not cheap to make a film. And we had to crowdsource all of the money. And so that was a lot of work. And so I became the producer and director. So the director is the one who hires the camera crew and writes the questions and does the interviews. But then the producer is the one who books the flights and figures out where we're going to have lunch and, manages everything. So like is the mom, right, of the production. And so I was both those things, and the chief fundraiser for all the money and everything. So it sucked my life force out of me, this movie. And last year, 2019, I traveled every other week pretty much. I would be home for a week, traveling home. And as someone who's highly sensitive to gluten, it's not easy to stay healthy. And I need a lot of sleep, and that gets interrupted when there's crazy time zones. And, we were in Europe a few times and everything. So, and the days are long. Yeah, I know it sounds so romantic, but it is, 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. kind of days. And then you're up the next morning at 6 again, on no food kind of thing. Because I'm not a great producer and I would just, but so I'm so glad the film's done. And I'm never doing another film again. This is it. This is
when can we see it?
So the film is completely done. I am releasing it to the people who pre-ordered the book or supported me through my crowdfunder very soon. Just working on the technology. Actually, I have a guy in Australia that's building my membership portal and doing all my email. I don't even know all the technology. Is a lot of behind the scenes work in order to make that work properly. And then, so that'll be sort of our test run of this tech platform. And then, we are going to be in the fall releasing it for 1 week for free on my website, sacredcow.info. I'm not 100% sure of the date yet. It'll probably be sometime October, November. And it's going to be 1 week only. And so people can sign up for my newsletter at sacredcow.info to get updates on how they can see the film for free. And after that, we're going to pull it back again and then release it on the mainstream platforms. It'll probably go out in like February or January, February to, more of the mainstream, where you can just download it and for a small fee or something like that. So, so if folks are interested in this, and also the book is a great primer. If they get it soon, they can read it before the film. And the film is just a really great sort of, there's animations and illustrations that really help you understand a lot of the big picture ideas in the book.
Can I ask when you finished the filming and being a producer and the director?
Thank God before coronavirus.
Okay.
So we finished my last shoot. Well, my last big shoot was Mexico, and that was last October. And then I think I did just a couple more interviews. Like, we realized we needed someone to talk about this, So basically I did the film kind of in a backwards way, where I shot everything and then I built a film.
Yeah.
Because we weren't really sure exactly how to tell the story. It's a lot of, like, do we make this a docuseries? Like, how do we even approach this? And so I hired a writer that basically went through every single interview and every single shoot I did. And she wrote the film. She was magic. And she's very highly experienced in documentary writing. And she saved the day. In 1 month, she went from not even having heard the word ruminant before, she had to look it up, to completely writing the film and wrapping her head around this entire argument: nutrition, environment, ethics, understanding, all these. I had in total 30 interviews that were over 1 hour long. Not all of them made it into the film. But I mean, there was just so much that she had to do. So she's actually the writer. Callie is the hero of the project.
Well, I'm going to make an expert observation, Diana, for you from wherever 1,000 miles away we are, is that if you were exhausted after the project, your energy's back.
That's it.
It's well and truly back.
Well, I'm really happy that it's done, and that I don't have to be. Although I'm really sad that all the travel got canceled, because I was invited to so many different countries to screen it and everything. So when COVID opens back up again, I hope that I can make it to Australia to do some screenings.
That'll be wonderful. So we normally finish off with our last question for guests as well. And that's, what are your 2 or 3 things in your game plan for a healthy life?
Like long-term healthy life?
Yeah. What do you have in your kit bag that
you
utilize?
I eat a really high protein diet, and I figured out for me that that's the way I need to eat. So I eat a lot of meat, actually. I have learned to be completely unapologetic about my need for a lot of sleep. And so I go to sleep before my kids a lot of times. I have 2 teenagers. And I'm like, okay, guys, check it out. 9:30, gotta go, I think just getting light exposure and just making sure that I'm outside every morning as much as I can be, even if I don't feel like it, and walking outside as much as I can.
Great. Excellent. Now, just share with the listeners, where can we find you again? And obviously, you just mentioned the movie coming out soon, so that's pretty exciting on that front. But where can we find you?
I'm most active on social media on Instagram, and my handle on Instagram is Sustainable Dish. And so I post there pretty much every day, and then I'll put things in my stories too. And then I have a clinical practice. I've worked with people in Australia before as helping them with their health. And so that's at sustainabledish.com. That's more of my nutrition end. And I'm starting, I didn't take clients for a very long time while I was working on this because it was just too much, but I am now taking people. And then sacredcow.info is where information on the book and the film. And then we have a blog there that's more environmental based. And so we're posting about cows, the environment, but also the impact on, I'm very, very interested in the impact of animal source foods on people that need it most, women and children, especially in developing countries. And so I'm hoping to do more work on that moving forward.
You've got an outstanding podcast as well.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I have a podcast called Sustainable Dish.
Yeah.
And actually, I have some really, really great episodes that I'm really excited about that are coming up really soon. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but the whole month of September is, I had taken a break personally from being the one to run the podcast just when I was underwater with the film. But now that I have energy to put back into the podcast, I've got just the most amazing guests for the month of September. It's the best ones I've done.
Awesome. Can't wait for that one. Well, Diana, you've been a wealth of knowledge. It's been fantastic getting your insights into your views, and we can't wait for the movie. We really appreciate you joining us on the Changeroom podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Diana.
Beautiful. That was awesome, Diana. That was unreal.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Loved it.
Thank you.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. And
Awesome.
I'm really looking forward to the movie, and well done on the book. It was fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I think I'm hoping the film is well received. I don't know. Some people didn't get it, and I don't know. We'll see. I hope it works. It's a lot like the book, right? It's just not for everybody, right?
It'll get a lot of traction over here, I reckon.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a lot of support from Australia. A lot. In fact, the one guy that's given me the most for this impact campaign is an Australian guy. So, he really wants me to do work there. So I'm hoping to come.
Great.
Cool.
Yeah.
Get this guy on board. He knows everyone.
Awesome. Where are you guys in Australia?
We're in Sydney.
Okay.
Yep. So
all right.
Got to come to Sydney if you come to Australia.
I want to come, and I have to bring my son, who's a big surfer.
And best beaches in the world.
Yeah, he watches the Bondi Beach or whatever that
Bondi
show
Rescue.
you guys constantly.
Well,
and he can do a perfect Australian accent.
Yeah.
He can stay downstairs at my house if he likes. He'll have to walk 150 meters to the break.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So yeah, I live just south of Sydney. So yeah, it's
okay.
Yeah.
Are there a lot of sharks?
No, not where we are, but
No.
There has been more over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, but
yeah,
it's pretty good where you are. No sightings.
Probably.
There was someone got attacked a little
Down
while
your
ago.
way?
Yeah, not that long ago.
But you're probably more likely to get hit by a car.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's yeah.
Okay.
It's
Well, I do plan on coming at some point. I have a lot of friends in New Zealand, and I've already been to New Zealand, and I'm hoping to go back next year. My son will not let me go to Australia without bringing him. So
how old is he, Diana?
He's 16.
Okay.
And we're actually pulling him completely out of school this year because they're doing remote learning, and it's all Zoom, whole thing. And he can't do that. He doesn't, that's not how he learns. And so we're just going to skip this year completely and go back to school when it's actual school again.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to line up adventures to do with him. And I'm hoping travel opens up soon so I can take him places.
Well, if you come to Australia, we'll take him out for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I worked in the surf industry for
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's worked with all the surfers down here. So
he's now, my son's just like getting sponsored. Like, he's really good.
Yeah.
Okay. Who's he sponsored by?
Oh, some surfboard company. I don't know.
Okay. All
yeah.
Right. Well, if you tell him to look in Wollongong, which is just south of Sydney.
What's the town?
Wollongong.
Wollongong?
Yeah, well done. W-O-O-L. Wollong, L-O-N-G, gong. Yeah. So anyway, if there's some great breaks. There's a lot of great surfers come from that area. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm starting to figure out